Welcome, everybody. Welcome to this brand new podcast. And before we get started with our guests on this very first episode, I want to lay out for you sort of the premise of the show. And I wrote my most recent book, Sell Without Selling Out, in large measure because conversations I was having with hundreds of sales leaders and sales managers and individual contributors and other people involved in sales, and also looking at data from sales industry analysts and research firms, that made the case that really over the course of the last 10 to 15 years, we've actually gotten worse at this whole business of selling, not better. You know, despite all the advantages we have of great tools and technology, that we're becoming less proficient in what we do in front of buyers and helping our buyers make their decisions. And there's no place that the drop in sales effectiveness showed more than in the continuing fall of win rates in B2B selling. The authors of an excellent book titled Strikingly Different Selling commissioned a third-party research firm to go out and talk with thousands of B2B sales organizations across the globe in multiple market segments, not just in tech. And what they discovered is the average win rate on deals over $100,000. So, yeah, on deals of pretty modest size, average win rate in B2B sales is 17%. Ooh. In other words, sellers on average are winning less than 1 out of every 5 opportunities they worked on their most qualified opportunities. And what's perhaps most shocking about that, at least to me, is, and see my guests think about this, is that seemingly sales managers and sales leaders and sellers are oblivious to their win rates and the story that the win rate tells about how they sell. So this new podcast, is we're going to focus on sales effectiveness. We're going to focus on win rates. We're going to talk about the story and the meaning of your win rates and the factors that influence your win rates, and the fact that nearly every aspect of your selling does indeed influence your win rate. We're going to talk the factors that influence buyers and decisions they make, and obviously the influence that has on your win rates. And as always, with all my podcasts over the years, you can expect practical takeaways that you can use to help improve your selling and your win rates. Because here's the thing, as a seller, there's lots of things we can't control. We can't control the product, we can't control the features, can't control the pricing, but we can control how we sell. And in today's modern markets, where buyers are sort of inundated by a surplus of choice, in many markets, the vendors all appear to be alike to the buyers. The products all roughly do the same thing. The products are all priced roughly the same. So in the absence of true differentiation, the most important differentiation in the mind of the buyer becomes the experience they have with the seller. And so the key to improving your win rates is improve how you sell, improve the experience that you provide the buyer as they're going through the buying process. So every week I'll be here with a range of guests with various backgrounds and expertise to help you do just that, to help you improve your win rates. So today I've got 2 very special guests to help me kick off this brand new podcast. First up, we've got Brandon Fluharty. Brandon's an extremely accomplished salesperson. Many of you follow him on LinkedIn. He's now an entrepreneur, helping other sellers try to achieve and what he achieved, the great success he achieved in his career. So Brandon, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Andy.
And with Brandon, joining today is Dave Brock, friend of mine. I think we've known each other, it seems like, for a while, Dave. Dave has a long background in sales and sales leadership, and for a number of years has run the firm he founded, a really highly respected sales consulting firm, works with sales teams around the world on issues of sales effectiveness. So Dave, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much. It's great to be here.
All right. So brief introductions. Brandon, expand on that brief introduction.
Yeah.
Hey, James.
Yeah, no, excited to be here, Andy, and with you here, Dave. So I started my first sales role, happened into sales. I started as an account manager in 2006 in New York City after a failed attempt of becoming a professional soccer player in Europe. And
football. Yes. Football is life.
Yes. You'll never walk alone. I know we're both Liverpool supporters.
Liverpool fans, yes.
Yeah. And then I made a life decision to leave New York City, and we landed in a small town in Florida, Sarasota, and I had to climb my way up selling $45 print ads to small local bars and restaurants, to eventually getting into mid-market sales, to eventually getting into enterprise sales, to eventually thriving with a mid-cap public conversational AI company where I sold into strategic accounts. Had my most prolific period during that 4-year period, able to be a perennial 7-figure seller and a 7-figure earner. And last year in 2022, decided to turn that income into independence and start my own one-person business, which, yeah, as you mentioned, helping other sellers to turn their intentions into impact, into income, and eventually independence.
And I take all credit for your success. By the way.
Yes. Our coaching in 2018, 2019 was instrumental in laying some of the foundations.
I think that was your first $1 million year, wasn't it?
That was.
Yeah. So, and who was your coach? Just to say that again. Okay.
I hope you got a healthy commission from that.
Yeah, I should have gotten paid, not on an hourly basis, but on a percentage. But
that's right.
I'm just happy that his success. So, Dave, tell us a little bit about you.
I'm Dave Brock, author of the Sales Manager Survival Guide and upcoming Sales Executive Survival Guide. I run a boutique consulting company called Partners in Excellence. About 15 of us scattered around the world, primarily working with very large corporations. And I got into sales in a very obscure way. I was studying for my PhD in theoretical physics and planning on being a researcher and professor. And one weekend I was up skiing at Heavenly Valley, met this inventor. And so we'd ski down together and then ride the chair and talk about his invention together. And a couple of weeks later, he calls me up and he says, Dave, how'd you like to be our senior vice president of product development and engineering? And here I was, 21 years old, and said, holy shit, this is cool stuff. And it was a typical Silicon Valley story. We had a hot product and we failed miserably. And I discovered, there's a lot to building a startup company, a lot more than just a hot product. And so I went, got my MBA, ended up going to the dark side of the world. I sold mainframe computers for IBM in New York City. And then went up the food chain in IBM, went and co-founded a software company in kind of the engineering design space. And they grew that fairly quickly. Went and ran as CRO or CEO of some turnaround tech companies, went back and founded a small AI company in the very early days of AI, and ended up selling it to the original company I had co-founded. And now I try and stay ahead of all the trouble I cause.
Yeah. Yeah, and you do that very well. So, well, thank you both for joining me. I mean, this is, I know for you guys too, this whole idea of effectiveness in sales, about win rates in particular, we've all talked about it individually. We'll talk about it here together. To me, it's the single most important metric for an individual contributor is the win rate. And I think even necessarily for a team as well. But I mean, it is the clearest indication of the value your buyer has found in the experience of working with you. And yeah, their vote on really how good a job you did at selling. I'm just interested in your take on it. Dave, why don't you talk about that for a second?
Well, I think the win rate is kind of a starting point for really performance leverage. I think one of the most important things we have to start talking about at win rates is, what is it? How do you measure it? Because almost everybody I talk to has a different way of measuring it, whether it's, from just raw leads to what orders are produced, which is probably the worst way to measure a win rate. Or, more typically what I look at is, rock solid qualified opportunities where people have made a commitment to do something. And what percentage of those do we win? And then why?
Yeah. I mean, I think, you look at the start of a period, month or whatever. And if you're working on, if you have 10 opportunities you're working on and 10 close, what percentage of those did you win? That's your win rate.
Yeah.
Keep it real simple. I mean, I know there's, as you said, there's some debate about that, but Brandon, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I fully agree. I think there needs to be clarity on defining what a true win rate is, because everybody seems to have their own definition on it. And when I, again, look at the portion when I was selling into Fortune 500 companies in a strategic account role, I was obsessed about really two things. Win rates. I kept data for myself outside of Salesforce that I would constantly look at and check in with myself on a constant basis, at minimum monthly. Win rate was a part of that. And my average bookings, I was, focused on net new logo acquisition, So I was focused on what's my average bookings? How do I improve that?
Right.
Those were then the two levers that I could manage my process, my business against. And the way I defined win rate was if there was a mutual agreement from both sides of the table to pursue something, and we committed our time, energy, and intention towards that. And I got to a stage where it was me deciding, yes, this is worth engaging with. And the client side, the prospect said, yes, this is worth engaging, where we could actually put something in front of them to decide on and make a decision on. That's what I looked at. A lead, because an SDR set up an appointment and convinced them to take a half-hour meeting, that is not an opportunity. That's not necessarily a qualified opportunity.
Right. Yeah. And my definition is very similar to yours, Brandon, is, yeah, you're talking to somebody that's made the commitment to invest the time, and I call it time, attention, and resources to make a decision. And yeah, if you get to another period and you put in the disposition of the deal in Salesforce, and it's, you win or you lose, right? And that percentage that you win. And so you said you tracked it. So what was your win rate?
So I ended my career at 78% win rate.
Okay. Make me feel bad. Well, mine was, I sold during my career as a seller before I started my own company, selling things from 6 figures to 9-figure type deals, but I was at 63%. That was mine. And I tracked it through a big chunk of my career because for me, that was everything. I mean, I didn't know that there's what else made more sense. Dave, how about you? Did you track it or?
Well, I mean, in my company right now, win rate is one of 4 critical metrics that we track. In our company, we have the 15 people, we have 13 that are basically sellers and deliverers, and we range 82 to 89%.
Right. What's shocking to me, and over the last couple of quarters, back in the fall of 2022, my company, we started this cohort-based coaching program called Selling School, which is really to teach people how to use the precepts from my book, Sell Without Selling Out, to increase their win rates. And when we get together for the first meeting, we ask people, these are all AEs, many of them with 10 to 15 years experience. We ask, what's your win rate? And fewer than 10% can answer the question.
The same thing with managers, though. I deal with
that was the next thing.
level executives.
Right.
And, some of the first questions I ask them is, what's your overall win rate? What's your average deal size? What's your average sales cycle look like? And most of them are absolutely clueless about what those metrics are.
Yes. Well, this is so curious. So why do you think that is? Why do you think that this is not, we've gotten so sidetracked by the activity metrics that we've lost sight of the fact that this is the thing that measures the job you're doing. It's not your quota, it's your win rate.
Yeah, I mean, being a part of a high growth SaaS company, and I'm seeing this now with the individuals that I mentor and coach, is that fear-based management has creeped in, and it's activity metrics over impact. And I think, especially in today's environment, there's a return to rigor by organizations that needs to be flipped on its head, and impact needs to be measured at a higher degree of scrutiny. Right. And I think we've just, for the past several years, call it maybe a decade, a lot of, at least in the SaaS world, in the technology world, the high growth, unicorn types of company, the amount of growth that's occurred has been pretty staggering. And so there's been a complacency, laziness, but also fear from the top. And it stems all the way at the board level of we have to just grow at all costs. And I think that has trained sellers from the bottom up that it's all about activity. It's all about number of emails sent, number of calls to meetings ratio. How many proposals have you sent out? And we've been sort of programmed to be very robotic versus bringing a very human experience into a human-driven business that we're in. And, for me personally, again, working with Fortune 500 level accounts, being hyper strategic, I knew that I couldn't measure based off of activity. It had to be based off of impact. I needed to be super rigorous about even saying no more than yes. And in fact, that was sort of the key driver for me, is making saying no as my default, versus I think what we typically see in sales is, yes, give me more leads, let me say yes to every opportunity, because I don't know what's going to come next. And I think that stems from the top, and that needs to be corrected at the top.
Dave?
I think leveraging off what Brandon has said, there's just such an irrational focus on activity right now. And, as I look at, people measure number of dials you make, number of emails you make, those kinds of things. And, with the technologies we have today, any person that can't make 100 dials by the first coffee break in the morning, isn't doing their job. How many conversations that they had is a different issue. And, and today with ChatGPT, I read an article a couple of weeks ago on LinkedIn, 15 minutes, I can send out 1,000 personalized emails, but what kind of responses am I getting? So I think we get distracted by, as Brandon says, the activities we do and not the outcomes or impact those activities have. I think at a senior management level, I see another kind of distraction is we meet our revenue goals. So for instance, last year I had a project with a very large company, about a $6 billion company. They've been growing by about 20% a year, and they've been beating their revenue goals every year. And they said, Dave, we're really doing fantastic. We just want you to come in and look at us and say, we have these ambitions for the next 5 years. How well positioned are we to do that? And I looked at it, and their average win rate was 17%. And they had no idea, because they were so distracted by we're hitting our revenue targets. And I went to them and I said, no problem. You're going to meet your 5-year objectives. No problem at all. But I'm sure glad I'm not a shareholder, because you're underperforming your potential.
Right.
And when I said, your win rate's 17%, I used to fire people whose win rates were less than 30%. And I said, look at that. You're happy with the revenue that you're achieving, but look at the revenue you could get if you simply doubled your win rate. And so at a senior executive level, there's this distraction. Are we hitting our revenue targets, or are we performing to our potential?
Well, but I think it's also amplified by this idea that, are we hitting our marketing targets, right? Because, if you increase win rates, my story when I was working at startups is my, unique skill was come in and take over a sales team and double and triple revenue without adding headcount.
Yeah.
Because we teach people how to sell what they have and to be effective at doing it. And in today's environment, just think of all the money you could save from marketing spend if people were able to sell with higher win rates, because you would need less pipeline. But there's this, pipeline infatuation, among other infatuations that exist out there. And it's part of the, at least to me, and I'm not be too crude with the analogy, but if you're operating in this sort of consistent basis, as your company was that your client, Dave, you talked about, they could be meeting their goals, but basically they've turned sales into playing the odds.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. If we get enough, a casino game, we sort of know what our odds are of winning. So if we just keep feeding the funnel with enough, and we're just competent at selling, not really good at selling, just competent, what can hit our targets?
I kind of take it from a maybe different point of view too, is, if you're getting 17% win rate and you look at having to do, hundreds of calls, thousands of emails, that's just too much work for me.
Yeah.
I'd rather win 2 or 3 times the amount these guys are doing, because the pipeline dynamics change profoundly. If you just double your win rate, or if you double your win rate and double your average deal size and things like that. And people don't know how to take a look at those metrics and play the games to say, and I'm, frankly, a lazy sales guy, is, for me, we're at, in the mid 80s for win rates, and our average deal sizes are $1.5 million, and we've really reduced our sales cycle tremendously. And so I get a lot done with very little bit of work. And I don't want to work so hard to, deal with thousands of emails and hundreds of phone calls.
Yeah. And I think that's spot on, that there's this obsession with busyness that spurs on this activity-driven type of approach where, I think the better principle is, and I'm stealing this from Greg McKeown, author of Essentialism, less but better. Right. And if you could design your sales team or frankly your organization around that principle, then it becomes really about recruiting. Back to the analogy we like to use a lot, Andy, athletics, world-class sports teams know how to recruit well. And so but that's got to be steeped in a design principle around less but better, so that you can bring in true impact players, and you don't need to manage around busyness. You don't need to manage around impact. In fact, what becomes a better metric to have discussions in one-on-one meetings is, well, tell me about a story you uncovered with a prospect or a customer this past week versus how many meetings did you set? What's the point of having 4 meetings that lead to no, future conversations or impact? But if you could have, unearth a real customer story, that's a better conversation to have in a one-on-one meeting versus just looking at a set of activities. So,
Yeah, no, I'm sorry to interrupt. I was just going to say one of my favorite quotes recently I've been using is from Edward Deming, right? Or the great father of quality control. And I posted on this a week or so ago. He said, every system is perfectly designed to get the results it gets.
Yeah.
And, we look what's happening certainly in the SaaS world, and, these companies accepting these low win rates. That's the way the system's designed.
Yeah.
And I always sort of amused is, people tout, these high price consulting firms they bring in to do their revenue architecture. And it's like, sure, but what's your win rates?
Yeah.
And you need to have a process, but the process is generating these subpar results that are leaving, as I think Dave mentioned, is leaving money on the table.
Yeah.
And it's like, why are we celebrating that?
Yeah.
Because this is the system.
Yeah.
So let me ask the question: as individual contributors and as organizations, what's a good win rate in your mind?
I gravitate towards, 70% or above, I think is sort of the bare minimum. I don't know that you can put a specific number on and be interested in hearing Dave, who's seeing 80+%. Maybe the 70% is too low, but that seems a lot more manageable. Then you can design quality systems around recruiting. Marketing has a very distinct function in supporting sales, in not of just bring in everything that can possibly come through the door. They can be hyper selective in, here are specific accounts that we want to pursue because we have a distinct point of view on it. We have a distinct perspective on it because we know we can make the biggest impact at these organizations versus trying to rule the world, change the world, win everything because of this sort of ignorant, egotistical view that a startup needs to become $1 billion unicorn, versus a calm, sustainable company that does high quality work.
And I think you triggered a thought is that, to me, one of the real issues when you're, again, an organization that's operating in a low win rate environment is that this sort of feeds through back to marketing and creating this vicious cycle is that you're only winning 17%, as Dave talked about, of your qualified opportunities. Mm-hmm. How can you be an effective channel back to marketing and say, this is who we should be targeting in our marketing efforts?
Right.
Because you don't really know.
Right. Yeah.
Right. Until you get your win rate up.
Yeah.
And if you do, then as the win rate goes up, then you can start creating a virtuous cycle where we say, hey, we really get this, right? Yeah. Because I would make the argument that at 17% win rates or 25% win rates, despite this being the buzzword that many marketers like to use, you don't have product market fit. Yeah. I mean, there's one of two things that happen at low win rates. Either one and or both. Either you don't have product market fit, or you just suck at selling.
Yeah.
And it's probably some combination of the both.
And I was in a conversation this morning with Brent Adamson, Matt Hines, and we kind of got into that. And your costs of selling, so if you're looking at it from an organization point of view and profitability, your costs of selling at those low win rates are just prohibitive. If I could, with the same head count, winning 30%, 40%, think of what that dumps down to my bottom line and profitability.
Well, I mean, there was a guy that took issue with me online a couple weeks ago. So I made this comment. I said, anything under 100K is pretty much transactional these days.
Yeah.
And he's like, how can you say that? He said, would you call this deal, our average deal size 35K, and we make 8 calls and we do 5 demos and we talk to, and I'm like,
yeah,
dude, if you're only winning 25% of your deals, that doesn't pay. You can't keep doing that.
That's right. And that's the root of it. That is the root of the issue, is that I think false narrative and that false thinking is just throw a bunch of bodies at it, get the land, it can expand later. I buck that trend. So in the 4-year period where, I earned life-changing income, I purposely went into 14 very strategic accounts that, again, we had that mutual buy-in from both sides of the table. I lost 4 of those opportunities. Those were 4. 3 of those were those companies saying, thanks, Brandon. We appreciated everything you put in front of us, but we're going in a different direction. Yeah, those stung. One of those was our company choosing not to move forward, even though that particular company wanted to move forward. That stings too, but nothing you can do about that. But the other 14 opportunities that I won, I was hired to be what you were describing, Andy, is just go sell a starter package. That's what we called it. And granted, it was a $250,000 program, but the idea was just go hustle, constant activity, get in front of these stakeholders. But I thought to myself, well, wait a minute. If I am going to spend 6 months, 9 months, however long it's going to take to sell present a $250,000 problem that I'm solving for, it's going to take just as long, if not longer, than if I were to elevate my stature within the organization to try to solve for a $25 million problem. And what I ended up doing was win rate is a parent metric, and then my average deal size and my average deal cycle were sort of the complementary metrics that supported win rate. My average booking was 1.92 million when I was hired to sell an average of $250,000 deals. By elevating up within the organization, I go into the deep blue ocean and reduce the competition. I'm no longer in RFP territory. We're talking about transformations. And that's, again, a focus on quality. That's a focus on impact. That's a different selling style than, okay, let's hire some robots if we could and just sell these small, packages that get the new logo in the door, and then we'll figure it out later. And where I'm coaching a lot of individuals now are individuals who have to fix those problems. Oh, we just got a horrible deal done that didn't strategically align with the initiatives, the growth initiatives of the organization, just to get a deal done at the end of the quarter. And now, an AE or an account manager has to come in and fix that. Now, there's opportunity in fixing those problems, but why is that a problem in the first place?
Well, and you brought up a really critical point too. I'm sorry, Davis, just real quickly is, the amount of time that you need to invest as a seller for a $250,000 deal could be very similar to a $25 million deal. I mean, this was something I discovered early in my career, which is why I gravitated up market. It was like, it's taken me just as long to sell to this mid-sized company as it is to this big company. Let me go sell to the big company. Yeah. Dave.
No, Brandon said something that I think is really important, is I kind of look at the performance lever mix. There are all sorts of performance levers, but the core ones are win rate, average deal size, and sales cycle. And what I find too many people doing is they almost accept those as laws of nature that I can't change. So I do the math to get my revenue. And, if my win rate's 17%, then in my revenue per deal is $1,000. And if I want to make $1 billion, I got to do a hell of a lot of prospecting. But, they don't look at says what causes each one of these and how do we tweak them? And things like, and as I kind of look at it, you asked the question earlier is what's a good win rate? As a consultant, the only responsible answer I can say is it depends. But is that I worked with a company, a very large European company. Each salesperson had an average of about 1,000 accounts. Their average deal value was about $10,000. And their win rates were really pretty good in the mid-50s. And they came to me and said, Dave, to meet our growth objectives, we're going to have to hire 500 salespeople a quarter. 500 salespeople a month. That's kind of tough.
Yeah. I think.
How do we do that? How do we afford it? Blah, blah, blah. So
Right.
we went through and re-engineered the thing, and we all of a sudden said, something's wrong. So what we did is we started getting in under these numbers that we've been talking about. And first we did is we created an inside sales organization. We took the average salespeople from average of 1,000 accounts each to 15 accounts each, and we kept their quotas the same. And most of them were saying, oh my God, what do I do?
Yeah.
And what they had to do is we have to chase things at higher deal values.
Right.
Because, their win rates are pretty good. So you start looking at what the leverage is. How do we go after higher deal values? Well, the interesting thing they found was those deals always existed, but they were so busy doing that transactional stuff that they were missing those big deals. And all of a sudden they started going in. So within 18 months, their average deal size went from $10,000 to, I believe the first phase was $300,000. And within 3 years, their average deal size was $1.5 million. And last year, the average deal size was $10 million.
Yeah.
And, but what happened is we got the managers to really understand what drives the numbers, where are the levers here, and how do we start tweaking them? What was interesting as we went through this is their win rates went up to in the mid 60s, low 70s. Average deal sizes were skyrocketing. So you can imagine the revenue impact. The thing that they were looking at then is how do we tweak sales cycle? And sales cycle is a bit of a tougher thing to tweak.
Yeah.
But
It is. But I mean, this gets to one of my, bugaboos is organizations think, oh, well, we got to start with small companies. Well, we'll learn what we're doing selling to small companies and it'll go up market over time.
Yeah.
And my approach was always in growing companies was if we want to sell to big companies, let's start selling to big companies. That's how we learn what we need to do.
Yeah.
This is how we get good at selling to big companies. And so that's one that I think companies really miss the mark on is if you want to sell to big companies, start by selling to big companies. The other thing too is we've all have talked about sales cycles. That I don't think sales cycles are duration. I think they're quantity. It's, the amount of time you put in, because that's your ultimate limiting factor as an organization of how many deals you can do.
Yeah.
But
companies are completely unmindful of that. I mean,
see, that's where you start going through and engineering what you do is in our own company years ago. I mean, we have very high win rates. We have reasonably high transaction values. And so we started saying, what could we do? We discovered we were doing an average of 22 meetings to close. And for us, about 50% of the time, it meant jumping on an airplane, taking the time to fly maybe internationally, pay for that, and looking at all the time. And so you try and pack as much as you could into a trip, but it was still a huge time drain and a huge cost. And so we started looking at what do we do? And we took kind of a design thinking kind of approach. And we're now down to an average of 9 meetings to close. So we've doubled our productivity. Right. We haven't reduced the customer decision cycle. We've reduced it by about 20%, but we've reduced the time it takes us to do a deal by over 50%. So now we can go and do, grow our revenue.
More deals.
Do more deals. Yeah. And the funny thing about that is customers love it because we're accomplishing much more in every meeting. And we're making them much more productive. And so
That's right.
we doubled our productivity. But see, what I don't see in this current culture of sellers and particularly sales managers is that let's not accept the numbers. Let's get underneath and see what causes
exactly.
the numbers and where we can start tweaking to drive performance. And I think part of it is this growth regardless of the cost. So we can always get VC funding. We can always get money. And so that causes us to be a little bit lazy and not look at how do we tweak the numbers. Brendan, you're a kid by my standards, but when you had these limited budgets and you said, how do you double your sales without any increase in headcount, any increase in budget? You sit down and scratch your head a few times.
The theory of constraints is great for sellers, right? I mean, this is how you figure it out. Go ahead, Brandon.
Dave, I love that you used the term design thinking, because that's what the macroeconomic environment is forcing organizations to do. Again, we've sort of been in a decade of easy funding, easy access to capital. That's all changed over the past 18, 24 months. And it's going to force us to go back to using design thinking, using human-centered principles to think about all the important constituents here. You've got the seller, right, who's on the verge of burnout, who's being told, activity busy. You've got, mid-level managers, and you've got sales leadership who's taking the pressure from, the VCs and the board. Hey, where's the revenue? We've got, to meet that 20% growth target quarter over quarter. But if we step back and think about also the prospect and the clients as this human-centered approach, and then it becomes, as you said, Dave, an engineering exercise. And here's a story of just that. In 2018, I was of the mindset as an individual contributor, I can win everything. Yes. And I was saying yes to everything. And Andy, the person who introduced me to you, Sean Burke, my manager at the time, a great manager. We sat down at the end of 2018, which was a strong year for me. One, Delta Airlines, a great deal with another large organization. I was, MVP. So I thought I was hot stuff. Again, thinking, I can win every account. Just give me everything. But he sat me down and he was very direct and said, Brandon, you're great in front of organizations where you obviously care about them. And I benefited from being in the B to C space. So it was very easy for me to be a customer of a lot of these large organizations that I was pursuing. And that became a bit of my ethos of, well, I want to be their customer before I ask them to be our customer. And the organizations where I couldn't be that, it showed. And he joined me in every one of the meetings along with a large account team. And he said, Brandon, when you obviously know something about the brand and it's very clear that you're passionate about being their customer, it shows. When you're not, that shows as well. And there's a big difference. So I went through a design thinking exercise using the Japanese concept Ikigai, which is, a Venn diagram of what are you good at, what does the world need, and so forth. And I did something similar. I had 5 criteria of things that were important to me. And I applied that as a filter against my strategic account list of 50 accounts. And I removed a lot of things. I then made no my default versus saying yes to every single account. And I went from a strong year, earning $200K that first year, to $1.5 million that in 2019 by focusing on working very specific accounts, not the largest accounts. I removed some very large organizations, Walmart, Apple, but I went further down the Fortune 500 list. Again, very large organizations, but I knew I could get high up in those organizations. I knew I could move faster. And that impacted my win rate. I went from 68% into the 70s. I increased my average bookings. I decreased my sales cycle. And I eventually got into like 6-month sales cycles selling, an average of, 7-figure deals by going through that design thinking type of exercise where, again, no was the default. Less, but was really sort of the design principle that went into that.
So applying consulting ease or whatever it is to what Brandon's saying is what Brandon did is he really focused on what's my ICP. And he just narrowed that target. And rather than going after the world, he said, here are the people I want to work with where I can have an impact, where I'm interested in, and they're going to be interested in me. And, the fastest way to improve performance, it's amazing how easy it is. Focus on your win rate. And what you do is you do vicious disqualification.
Yep.
Our pipelines are filled with wishful thinking and crap. We can double win rates and double performance just by cleaning the crap out of our pipelines.
Well, and this is the thing that drives me crazy. I was a big voice in the VC world that was talking last year about, as you scale, your win rates are going to go down.
Of course.
And I was like, yeah. And I was like, well, why? Yeah. Well, because you have more conversations. I said, well, so? I said, that doesn't mean you let them into your pipeline. It's like, as a seller, you choose, as Brandon so wisely said, you choose who you want to sell to. And in my first book, I used the analogy of, you as a seller, you're the bouncer at the head of the velvet rope. Mm-hmm. Who are you going to let into your club? And that's the decision. That decision has a huge impact on your win rate and your ability to serve your buyers.
And one of the most underlooked things in really the value we can create with our customers and the performance we can drive both for them and for us is that ICP. Yeah. And, the narrower and more refined you have it, all I want to do is I want to focus on the customers where I am the best in the world at solving a certain kind of problems and the customers that have those problems. I don't want to waste my time on anybody else, as charming and interesting as they might be. Yeah. I'm wasting my time and their time.
That's right. I call it the category of one seller. The seller, individual contributors need to be empowered to feel like they are a category of one. Only they in the world can solve the challenges of the person on the other side of the table, the prospect or the client. They should feel that experience. And sellers need to be enabled to make these decisions. Listen, you're hiring smart people for a reason. Now, don't handicap them by putting on layers of micromanagement. They are business owners within the larger organization.
And also just from a psychology standpoint, though, too, is if you're at a 25% win rate, just use that as an individual. And, if practice makes perfect, what are you practicing doing day in and day out? You're practicing losing, right? I lose 3/4 of what I do. I'm going to get pretty good at that.
Yeah.
And so we have to put people in a position where they have confidence. If they want to be that market of one, as you talked about, that brand of one, that comes from having the confidence of winning. Mm-hmm. And, people sometimes they hear me talk about winning. There's like, isn't that little salesy or something? It's like, no, it's not salesy at all. It's like, why do we stay in sales? Right? Some people say I stay in sales because I'm motivated by the money or so on. But we know from research, the people that are most successful over the long term are not motivated primarily by money, but it's by what they achieve, the fulfillment they find from working with their customers and so on. But I was just going to finish one sentence is you can't help your customers if you can't win their business.
Yeah.
I mean, that's it.
And part of it is we need to be very selfish and jealous about our time.
Yes.
And I'm not going to work with anybody that's going to waste my time. I can't help them and they're not going to help me. But there are very few people that have that psychology. Yeah. And as a consequence, they're wasting huge amounts of time.
Well, and I think people fiddle with the wrong things too. And we're sort of running out of time, but I just want to bring up one other point and get your take on it. Dave, you listened on the webinar I did this week with Brent Adamson and Aaron Evans and Howard Dover, and you were nicely commenting throughout it. But there was one comment that somebody made, because I brought up win rates, and this guy jumps into the comments and he says, win rate data is garbage unless your processes are really nailed tight. And I was like, well, that's like saying, I want to lose weight. I know I need to go to the gym, but I'm not going to go to the gym until I lose weight. Right? That's right. That's like, no, it's, sometimes people critique win rate as being a lagging indicator. And it's like, no, it's a leading indicator of future sales performance.
That's right. It's an indicator that you have found the right type of customers that you can impact, that they value what you offer. So use it. Just like when I talk about 7-figure earnings and 7-figure W-2s, people seem to get triggered by that. It's just an outcome of figuring out what worked and doubling down on the things that work. That's, again, how you get into that category of one territory, is being ruthless about your time. And I would argue also the other finite resources that a lot of modern sellers struggle with, and everybody in the performance economy, is your energy and attention, right? Mm-hmm. No use having all the time in the world if you're draining your energy because you're constantly hustling around the clock and getting 4 hours of sleep and wearing that as a badge of honor. You need to have the right energy as well. Same with your attention. Are you mindlessly scrolling social media, or are you reactively opening your laptop at the start of the day and giving your time, energy, and attention away to others before you've defined, this is the impact, this is the most important thing that I want to do, which, by the way, leads to you as an individual contributor feeling more fulfilled. And
exactly.
To what I love Dave talking about earlier is I was very similar. It was sort of a lazy seller. I want to do as least amount of work as possible with the highest amount of return. We should all aspire to that as performance-based knowledge workers. Our skills and our knowledge is up here. We don't have to be like a factory worker and trying to work like a labor worker. You use your skills and your knowledge to find where you can find the biggest impact. And that takes a level of discipline to say, no, I'm not going to give my time or energy or attention away until I, can focus on the most important tasks, which are high leverage, high value activities.
Right.
It's interesting when I work with clients, a lot of times I go in and I'll first, we're trying to do analysis and understand what the problems are and so on and so forth. And oftentimes I ask them, I say, tell me who your laziest sellers are who consistently make their numbers. And they say, well, why do you want to do that? Because I said they've broken the code.
Yes.
The people that can make their numbers without breaking a sweat have broken the code. They have the secret. And then you have all these other people that are working 70, 80-hour weeks, doing thousands of emails, hundreds of calls, not making their numbers. And, I feel bad for them. They're working really hard. They're trying really hard, but, nobody's helping them break the code to say, what is it that I do? And it's those lazy sellers that consistently make their numbers.
Well, that's because, the ethos is that somehow more is always better. I remember talking to a client that was a few years ago. They were celebrating the fact they had won the biggest deal to date in the company. And they did a pretty good job of documenting everything that went into it. And I looked at the detail of their internal win-loss analysis, and went to the CEO and said, yeah, you can do one more of those deals this year. He said, what are you talking about? I said, look at all the time it took, right? And you're just mindlessly having meetings. Sort of like the example I gave before, the $35K deal they were doing, 5 demos on. It's like, you spent all this time on this deal.
Yeah.
And it's not replicable. You can't do this again.
Yeah.
And it's just like, it hadn't even occurred because they were celebrating the fact, yeah, we got it. It's like, yeah, but you can't do another one.
But that's, again, about being jealous, stingy and selfish about your time.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, yeah, if you have a $35K deal, you have to relook at your process. So that's your average contract value across your sales. You can't afford to spend this amount of time on it. You have to figure a way. And the answer isn't necessarily product-led growth. I mean, it could be a product that demands a seller to be involved, but you need to figure it out.
Yeah.
All right, guys, thank you so much. You guys are come back as often as possible because this has been a great conversation. And we didn't touch many of the things I wanted to talk about, but we've got time. This is just the start of this journey. So I really appreciate it. Brandon, tell people how they can contact you and learn about what you do.
Yeah, very active on LinkedIn. Great place to follow and connect with me there, as well as some of the resources on BrandonFluharty.com.
BrandonFluharty.com. Yes. Yeah, do follow Brandon on LinkedIn. Dave.
LinkedIn as well, and partnersandexcellenceblog.com.
Excellent. All right. Gentlemen, thank you. And
Thank
look
you.
forward to doing it again soon.
Thanks, Andy.
Take care.